So today you have seen a very simple examples of comparing the trading system in the human society versus the physics collision system. And you can see these two systems, they share the same essence, which is the trading. Like they trade the money or they trade the energy, and that trading of a scalar is what connects those two systems together. So that's why we can use the physics, the collision system, to understand some behaviors in nowadays the economics. And this is a very powerful tool because usually when people they comment on they want to make a statement in economics, for example, maybe the technology caused the inequalities, or the industries, the rising of the industry, causing more poor people, or like something like that. Most of those statements are really just their observations, and they're not always true. Like those are statements just based on one person's observations. He probably has seen like 5 cases or 10 cases, and then draw a conclusion like that. Such kind of conclusion is not very, it's usually under debate and not very convincing. However, if we do econ physics, in econ physics, what we do is we try to look at a very complicated economic problem, simplify it down to a very simple model. Then we model this system just like how we model the physics system. And then by modeling this system, we will see some simulation result. And from that result, we can tell for sure, this system, this model will generate this result. It's a very powerful statement because it's in fact, right? Like a simulation tell you so, then it is so. So it seems like it's really too good to be true, but it sounds like physics is the way to study the human societies. But it does have its constraint. So now I want to talk about this could be hours of discussions or talks, but I just want to bring up 3 points that you can pay attention to in the future when you read a social science paper or a social science article. So basically, these are the 3 things we learned in the lab: model, data, and control variables. So whenever you see, because if we want to study like a social science, usually we need to simulate. So we need to build a model. Assuming, so for example, let's create a fair game. Assuming everyone gets $100, and they will use that $100 to play rock, paper, scissors and trade. They will not arbitrarily, spend $100 or burn their $100 bills. They are all reasonable. If they lose, they will definitely give you the money. If you win, you will also, just get the money you need. There's no any unfairness like in this game. But when you build such an ideal model, you have to ask yourself a question. Does this model really capture the essence of the system? Okay, for example, we know the human populations are growing. But that growing population is not captured in our model. Is that gonna be important for the wealth inequality question? Or maybe not. And we know that humans are more intelligent than a particle, right? Some people, they're smarter, they just have or they coming from a better family, a richer family, so they get a lot to start with. And does that intelligence, does the strategy between the people, does the politics of among the society, is that gonna affect the wealth inequality? And how do we incorporate it in our model? So you can see that whenever we build a simple model, we have to throw away some complicated factors. And when we throw away the complicated factors, we never know whether the one we throw away, whether that one is important or not. So that's why we need to be very careful when we build a model. But that doesn't mean like you always need to build the most complicated model in the world. It has its own beauty to build a simple model and then study some physics and the result from there, and then try to generate it into a more complicated case. So the first thing is model. Whenever you look at like a social science paper or articles, check the model first, and then ask yourself a question. Does this model convince you or not? So it does take a little bit you need some personal opinions to think about what's the most important. Does the model capture that? So that's one. The second one is the data. Okay, so you can see that today we show you the simulation. I basically show you the data from simulators. Okay, so even the rock paper scissors, the game, that is from a simulator. Like I wrote a program, and the program just mimic 1,000 people play 100 times of rock paper scissors, and then we get that result. But sometimes in most papers, they will have people they will take data from people, from real human. And because that's a little bit harder to do, so the data might be biased. So for example, if I do this experiment with a group of people who always play scissors in the game, then you can imagine that I will get, like eventually the wealth distribution is everyone will get $100 because it will be the draw like all the time. So that means I just recruit a bunch of like not unreasonable, but just a bunch of like special people. So the data is the second thing that you need to look at. And this is especially important if in the future you're in the medical field. Some people will say, oh, eating sugars will cause the diabetes, and then they take a lot of data from a group of people who likes eating sugars, and they just take the data from a very biased group, some people that all the people in there, if they like sugars, they all have diabetes. If they don't have the diabetes. So you can see, I guess sometimes the data can be pretty biased. So that's the second thing you want to look at. The third thing, the third is control variables. This is kind of the same as modeling, but here I want to point out is that most of the social science, they are not very good at keeping track of their control variables. They will make models from one and make another models, but they don't really control their variables. They just say, okay, I have a model one, I have model two, that's my result. So when they're drawing any conclusions, most of the conclusion they can draw is the relationship, not the causation. So for example, even though today I see, even though today, like I see a very strong correlation between, let's say, wearing a mask and get COVID-19. I still cannot say, wearing a mask will definitely prevent COVID-19. It's not causation problem. It's not causation relationship. I can just say, oh, these two seems like they have a high relationship, so maybe wearing mask will help. There's a maybe there. Like they cannot tell for sure because their control variables is not clear. Like there are probably other variables which will affect your result. So that's the third thing that you want to look at. Yeah. So now you probably will feel confused. It's like, okay, so it seems like, it's a lot of work reading a science article or like social science articles. Seems like I have to do so much work and then get a conclusion, which is kind of convincing and maybe not. That's a very normal comment. But such an article is still pretty beneficial to our life because, as we said, the physics, all the physics principles or articles, science articles, they build on a simple model. And the good thing about simple model is you can reproduce it and you can trust it. So you do have something that you can trust in the entire, in this entire big problems. And also the second thing I want to point out is physics is actually pretty good at applying physics to the social science. Is actually a pretty good approach, more than any other science. So like there's a field in physics we call many-body physics. So in many-body physics, we don't care about what particle it is, we just care about as long as I have so many particles, it could be all irons, it could be all hydrogens, it could be all human, it could be all like some molecules, a lot of DNAs, a lot of genes. As long as I have a collection of something, the same thing, then this guy, they will have a very and all of this group, they will have a common behavior. So it's a very interesting, it's like a pattern that will just appear as long as you have more than say 10,000, like 10,000 like stuff together. So that is the power. Like more is different is a very popular field nowadays. Okay, many-body physics. So one example is the phase transition. You know that the liquid, for example, the water liquid, the water, if you heat it up and it will turn into a vapor, it turns into the gas particle, the water gas particle. If you cool it down, it turns into the ice. So you see there's a phase transition for water molecule. But there's also phase transition for all the other molecules. That phase transitions for carbon dioxide, that phase transition for iron, there's a phase transition for so many different type of particles, right? And all those phase transitions, just like all of the, as long as you have a lot of atoms together, a lot of molecules together, put them together, and they have interaction between them, then there is a phase transition. So you can see phase transition as a common pattern for when you have a group of stuff together. Another interesting example is that in our DNA, so our DNA it's very long, like we have a lot of genes inside, right? And you can see those little parts, either ATCG or the combination of them. But some combination will turn this DNA into a species. Some just become a chemical soup. It just nothing happens because there are just way too many possibilities. But we don't have so many species, right? So there must be some combination will make this kind of gene become a species, and other combination, well, other combinations don't. So you see, there is a phase transition there. Okay, and that phase transition is actually pretty simple. Like it is the length of the it's the length of your DNA times the mutation rate. If it is greater than 1, if it's greater than 1, then it means it won't become a species. If it's less than 1, then it will become a species for DNA. So you see, it's like such a simple transition. Kind of like, if the temperature is over 100, water becomes gas. If it's less than 100, then it becomes water, right? It's like a very common, like a scenario. So you can see this is very interesting. As long as you have a lot of genes together, a lot of same thing stuff together, they have a pattern. There's always a pattern. So that's why if you can find a connection between the physics and some real life, like a real life problem, try to connect what they have in common together, and then you can tell a lot of, you will gain a lot of insight for this real world problem. Okay, so this is what I think is the most important thing that I would like you to learn in this course is insight, or we call physics intuition. Okay. Yeah, so I know that's a lot. Usually we will do this in class and then, with some pictures and examples and also some activities. So it's not that dry. But I hope that you do learn learn something from this. From this. Thank you.